Good morning, dear students. I am Vishram Singh, Assistant Professor English, working at Government PG College, Karoli. Through online mode, we are studying English literature. The lecture of the day is for the students of BA Part 3rd. Today we will study one of the finest poems written by W. Jordan, who is an important poet of modern poetry in English literature. The poem is an elegy which was written to mourn over the death of beloved poet, namely W.B Yeats, who is an Irish poet, who was died in the year of 1939, and the month was January, which I can call very cold month of the year. The title of the poem, In Memory of W.B Yeats. Let's begin the poem. The poem was published in another time in 1940. It is divided into three sections. Now we start. He disappeared in the dead of winter. The brooks were frozen, the airports almost deserted, and snow disfigured the public statues. The mercury sank into the mouth of the dying day. The first section of the poem is about the day on which W.B. Yeats was died. He, he is for the poet, disappeared in the dead of winter, when the winter was at its best. During that period, W.B. Yeats was died. He disappeared in the dead of wind. The brooks were frozen, the airports almost deserted. That was the situation we can see in winter season. The brooks were frozen. The water of brooks was frozen, and the airports almost deserted because the aeroplanes were not able to fly, able to leave the airport into the sky because the weather was not favorable. The airports almost deserted. Deserted means that there were no passengers, no travelers to travel by airplanes because this is the peak of winter season. The foggy weather was there, and snow disfigured the public statues, and the public statues were disfigured means were covered by snow, covered with snow, and due to the cover of the snow, the public statues were disfigured, or, or we are not able to see them. The mercury sank in the mouth of the dying day, and the mercury s- fell fell into the barometer. It was a sign that the day was very cold. When the day was dying means this is the time of the uh, setting sun. It was in the evening. The day was very cold. The temperature was very low. Oh, all the instruments agree the day of his death was a dark, cold day. And the poet here says that all temperature indicating instruments were agreed to say that the day of his death was very dark and cold day. Far from his illness, the wolves ran on through the evergreen forests, but nature was still in progress. There was no effect of the death of the beloved poet on nature. Far from his illness, however, the poet was ill. Poet was being treated in the hospital, but the bulls ran on through the evergreen forests. That was the natural activity of animals in the forest. It was going on. The wolves ran on through the evergreen forests. The peasant river means the pastoral river which was flowing through the villages. The peasant river was untainted, means unaffected by the fashionable keys. Keys means pots. By morning turns, the death of the poet was kept from his poems. The poet was died, or we can call he was struggling between death and life. By morning turns, the death of the poet was kept from his poems. But for him it was his last afternoon as himself. But for the poet it was his last afternoon on earth, an afternoon of nurses and rumors. On that afternoon, all nurses and medical staff were running here and there. That is the situation of a hospital in which he was mm, being treated. The provinces of his body revolted. Now the poet gives a very important example of metaphor. The provinces of his body means the poet was the emperor, and the body parts of the poet were provinces, means states. The states of his body revolted because there was no control over them by the poet. The squares of his mind were empty. The squares of his mind were empty. Empty means numb. There was no activity in them. Silence invaded the suburbs, and there was silence. Invaded means attacked the suburbs. Suburbs means uh, here the parts of the body of the poet. Silence invaded the suburbs. The current of his feeling failed, and he became his admirers. The current of life failed in him, means he was died. Now he had become uh, his admirers, because now the life of the poet was in the hand of his admirers. How they will think of him. Now he is scattered among 100 cities and wholly given over to unfamiliar affections. But the poetry of the poet is alive. He is scattered, means he is being read among 100 cities, and the people are giving different kind of affections to him, because they were not familiar with the poet. But the poetry of the poet is being read. Now he is scattered among 100 cities and wholly given over to unfamiliar affections, to find his happiness in another kind of wood, and be punished under a foreign code of conscience. Now he depends on the minds of the readers, how far they will understand him, and which kind of treatment they will give him. And now the poet will be given such kind of treatments by the readers, to find his happiness in another kind of wood and be punished under a foreign code of conscience, because uh, the reading code and conduct of the countries is different. So he will be treated differently in different countries. The words of a dead man means the poetry of the dead. The words of a dead man are modified in the guts of the living. Guts means the tastes and conscience, and we can call the understanding of the reader. So, according to the level of his readers, he will read, he will understood. Now he is not alive. His poetry is alive. The words of a dead man are modified in the goods of the living, but in the importance and noise of tomorrow, when the brokers are roaring like beasts on the floor of the course. That kind of uh, daily activity we can see, that there are the brokers who are roaring, who are shouting like beasts on the floor of the bourse, business exchange, and the poor have the sufferings to which they are very accustomed. And the poet wants to say that poetry of W.B. Yeats was not able to bring changes in the minds and thoughts of Irish people. They were living the same life of selfishness and the same life of daily. There was no effect of the poetry of W. Yeats on them. However, W. Yeats uh, wanted to change the mind and thought of the Irish people, but he was not able to do. When the brokers were when the brokers are roaring like beasts on the floor of the bourse, and the poor have the sufferings to which they are very extended, and the poor people are still poor, means their fate has not been changed so far, and the poor have the sufferings to which they are very accustomed, and each in the sale of himself is almost convinced of his freedom. Each in the sale of himself is almost convinced of his freedom. Means the people of Ireland are satisfied with their lifestyle, or with their thinking process, and with their selfishness. They don't want to be changed. However, W. Yeats struggled to change the mind and the thought process of the Irish people, but he was not able, and now he has been died. His poetry is alive. So the poet W. H. Auden wants to say that poetry cannot bring such kind of changes, and each in the sale of himself is almost convinced of his freedom. A few thousand will think of this day. However, he is convinced that few thousand people will think of the day, that they will remember. They will remember this day for the death of W. Yeats. The other people have nothing to do with it. A few thousand will think of this day as one thinks of a day when one did something slightly unusual. Just like when we do something unusual on particular day, we remember that day. So, in this fashion, in this way, some people will remember the day of the death of the poet, namely W. Yeats, who was a beloved poet of Ireland, but the Irish people are so selfish they will not remember him. However, his poetry is alive after his death. Oh, all the instruments agree, the day of his death was a dark, cold day. And this line is repeated. we can call it a refrain. All all the instruments agree the day of his death was a dark, cold day. W.S. Auden here wants to say that the day of the death of W. Yeats was very cold, and this was indicated by all temperature indicating instruments indicated the same thing, that the day was very dark and cold when W. Yeats was died. That's all for today. Thank you and have a nice day.